The hall was bright with laughter and music. Grace and Frank stood side by side on the stage, hands locked around the silver cake knife. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. The crowd of friends and family clapped and cheered, waiting for the couple to cut the towering white cake. But just as Frank raised his hand to slice, his phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the music like a warning bell. "Who's calling you now?" Grace asked, a smile still on her face. Frank glanced at the screen. His heart skipped. It was Miriam, his elder sister. He answered, "Hello." The trembling voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Frank, it's Emily. Your only daughter." She collapsed. "We've been calling for an ambulance, but they still haven't arrived." "What?" Frank's voice exploded, echoing through the microphone still clipped to his suit. Grace's smile vanished. "What's going on? What happened?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "I'll be right back," Frank muttered, his face pale, his hands shaking. He dropped the knife and bolted off the stage. "Frank, wait!" Grace shouted, running after him, her heels clattering on the floor. The guests froze, whispering in confusion. "What's happening?" someone asked. "Did something bad happen?" Frank didn't look back. His heart was pounding like a drum. He ran to the parking lot, yanked his car door open, and jumped inside. "Frank, talk to me!" Grace screamed, grabbing the door handle. But he pulled away, slamming the door shut. Within seconds, he was speeding out of the venue. The guests ran outside, watching in shock as the black car tore down the road. Grace's chest tightened with fear. She tried calling his phone, but her hands were shaking too hard to even dial. Frank's mind was in chaos. "Emily, my little girl, please be okay." His foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The world outside blurred. He didn't notice the giant lorry thundering toward him from the opposite side of the road. By the time he saw it, it was too late. Frank slammed his foot on the brake. Tires screamed. The lorry's horn blared, the sound stabbing the night air. Then crash. The impact was so loud, people on the street screamed. Glass shattered like falling stars. Frank's car spun and crumpled under the force. Crowds gathered. "Somebody call an ambulance," voices cried. A man yanked the twisted door open. Frank's body was slumped over the wheel, blood trickling from his forehead. He wasn't moving. Moments later, the ambulance arrived. Sirens wailed as paramedics lifted his unconscious body onto a stretcher and rushed him to the hospital. Back at the venue, chaos erupted. The music had stopped. Grace was pacing the hall like a woman trapped in a nightmare. Her hands trembled as she kept calling Frank's phone, but he wasn't answering. "Why isn't he picking up?" she whispered to herself, tears pooling in her eyes. The guests murmured, confusion buzzing in the air. Something terrible had happened. That much was clear. Then, Grace's gaze swept across the hall. Her stomach dropped. Emily. Her little girl was nowhere in sight. Miriam. Grace gasped. Miriam, Frank's eldest sister, was supposed to be looking after Emily while they celebrated. But neither Emily nor Miriam were in the hall. Grace's chest tightened like someone was squeezing her heart. She grabbed her phone again and called Miriam. "Please, pick up. Pick up," she begged under her breath. "Hello." Miriam answered, her voice strained. "Miriam, where are you? Where's Emily?" Grace's voice cracked with fear. We're at the hospital," Miriam replied quickly. Emily collapsed. They brought her here as fast as they could. "What?" Grace's legs almost gave out. "Which hospital? Tell me." Miriam told her the name of the hospital. Grace's tears finally spilled over. She turned to the guests, her voice trembling as she told them what had happened. The hall erupted in noise, gasps, whispers, and frantic questions filling the room like a storm. Pastor Silas had seen the panic in Grace's eyes and didn't hesitate. "I'll drive you," he said quickly, already hurrying to the parking lot. Grace clutched her phone, hands trembling. Her heart thudded in her chest like a warning drum. She dialed Aunt Miriam again. "Is Frank there with you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No," Miriam answered softly. "I called him when the ambulance was taking too long. I thought he could drive us. But the ambulance came soon after, and I've been calling him. He's not picking." Just then, Silas pulled up with his car. The headlights beamed across the darkened lot. "Grace, let's go," he shouted, throwing open the passenger door. Grace jumped in, her hands wiping tears that kept falling like rain. "Please, Silas," she begged, gripping the dashboard, "drive faster. Please, just get me there." Silas nodded and pressed his foot harder on the gas. Grace closed her eyes, whispering under her breath, God, please, protect my baby. Don't let anything happen to her. Please. When they reached the hospital gate, the guard barely had time to finish the routine check before Grace pushed the door open and jumped out. She didn't wait. She ran. Her heels clicked against the tiled hospital floor as she burst into the hallway, gasping for breath. Her eyes scanned the corridor until she spotted Aunt Miriam pacing nervously, tears in her eyes. Aunt Miriam, Grace cried. Where's Emily? How is she? She's still in the emergency room, Miriam said, voice trembling. They won't let me in. Before Grace could respond, chaos broke out again. Emergency. Move. Make way. Nurses shouted as they rushed through the hallway, pushing a stretcher. The loud wail of an ambulance outside echoed through the halls. Grace stepped aside, but as the stretcher came closer, her eyes locked on the figure lying unconscious on it. His clothes were torn. Blood stained his shirt. His face, barely recognizable under bruises and cuts. It was Frank. Her husband. No, no, no. Frank. Grace screamed, her voice cracking. Her legs gave out. Her purse fell to the floor. She collapsed. Everything went black. Grace woke up hours later, her head throbbing. A drip was attached to her hand. She blinked slowly and saw Aunt Miriam sitting beside her, gently holding her hand. The moment her mind cleared, her voice cracked out like a whisper. My daughter, my husband, how are they? They're alive, Miriam said softly. They're both still with us. That's what matters. Grace tried to sit up. Please, I want to see them. You need to rest first, Miriam said gently. You fainted. You're not strong enough yet. The door creaked open. A doctor stepped in, holding a clipboard. He looked calm, but serious. Mrs. Grace, he began, walking closer. We've run several tests on your daughter, and I'm afraid the results are not good. Grace's lips trembled. Please, just tell me the truth. The doctor sighed. Emily has a severe heart condition. She needs urgent surgery. If not done soon, her life will be at risk. Grace gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. The surgery is costly, the doctor continued. It will run into thousands of dollars. And your husband, he's in critical condition. We're doing all we can, but he also needs ongoing treatment. Ma'am, you need to be strong now, strong enough to fight for both of them. Tears spilled down Grace's face. She shook her head slowly, as if the words were too heavy to accept. Doctor, please, she whispered. I don't have that kind of money. Emily is our only child. We've been married 10 years, but for 7 of those years, we waited, prayed, for a child. Finally, God gave us Emily. Her voice cracked with pain. She is our miracle, our light. After her birth, we tried again, but nothing came. We were told it may never happen again. She's all we have. All I have. The doctor's face softened. We understand. But time is not on our side. The surgery must happen soon, and we need a deposit to proceed. Grace broke down completely. Please help me, doctor. I can't lose them both. I can't survive without them. The doctor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. We're doing all we can, ma'am. But now, we need you to do everything you can too, for Emily and for Frank. Grace wiped her tears, her body still shaking. Can I see them now? Yes, the doctor nodded. But you must be strong when you go in. They need your strength. Grace swallowed hard, trying to stop the tears from falling again. But they came anyway. I'll be strong, she whispered. I have to be. With the doctor on one side and Aunt Miriam on the other, Grace slowly got to her feet. Her body was weak, but her heart was heavier. They walked her down the quiet hospital hallway. The lights above flickered gently, and every step felt like it took forever. Grace's chest tightened with fear as they reached the first room. Inside, her little girl, Emily, lay motionless on the hospital bed. She looked so small, so helpless. Machines beeped steadily beside her. A clear oxygen mask covered her tiny face, and tubes ran in and out of her fragile body. Her chest rose and fell with each breath the machine helped her take. Grace's heart shattered. She rushed to the bed and gently held Emily's cold hand. My baby. Mommy is here, she whispered, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. Please wake up. Please don't leave me. She bent her head close and prayed, her lips trembling. God, I don't care about the cake, the guests, or even the anniversary. Just save my child. That's all I ask. Please. After a few long minutes, the doctor gently touched her shoulder. Come. Your husband is next. Grace wiped her face and followed him to another room. There, on the second hospital bed, was Frank. He didn't look like the man she'd laughed with just hours ago. His face was bruised. Bandages covered his chest and legs. He had tubes in his nose and wires on his chest. His eyes were closed. He looked like he was fighting between life and death. Grace stepped closer. Her hands trembled as she reached out and held his hand. "Frank, it's me," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, don't leave me. Emily needs you. I need you." Tears slid down her cheeks, landing on the bed beside his fingers. The doctor gave her a heavy look. "Mrs. Frank, we don't have time. You need to start finding the money now. If we delay much longer, it may be too late." Grace nodded slowly. "Okay, I will try. I have to try." With that, she stood tall, wiped her tears, and walked out of the hospital like a woman on a mission. She headed straight to the one place she thought might help, Pastor Silas's house. When she knocked, Silas opened the door and looked shocked to see her. "Grace, why are you panting like that? What's going on? How are Frank and Emily?" "They're not okay," she cried, barely able to hold herself together. "Pastor, I need help. Please." The doctor said Emily needs urgent surgery. It costs thousands of dollars. "I don't have it. Please help me." Silas frowned. "That's a lot of money, Grace. But I might be able to find a way." Grace's eyes lit up. "Really? Thank you. Please. I'll pay you back when Frank recovers. We'll sort everything out, I promise." But then Silas's voice dropped low. "There's something I want in return," he said, inching closer. Grace froze. "Anything," she said quietly, not knowing what was coming. "Just tell me." He looked at her with a crooked smile. "Grace, you're a beautiful woman. Honestly, I always wished I had met you before Frank did. You would have made a lovely wife." Her face turned pale. "I'm saying," he leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper, "I'll give you the money. But I want just one thing from you. Just one night. Just one moment in my room, and the money is yours." Grace gasped. "Pastor, are you out of your mind? Don't allow the devil to use you." He shrugged, smirking. "Nothing in this world comes free. You want your daughter to live? Then don't be foolish." He reached out and placed his hand on her thigh. Grace jumped up, her face burning with shame and fury. She slapped his hand away. "You're a wicked, shameless man," she screamed, her voice shaking. "You're disgusting." She turned and stormed toward the door. But Silas wasn't finished. He followed her outside, calling after her. "Hey, think about it," he shouted. "Think about your daughter. She's dying, Grace. And all you have to do is stop pretending you're better than the rest of us." Grace kept walking, her fists clenched, her heart racing. Silas kept shouting behind her. "You and your useless husband waited 7 years just to have that one child. And now you're going to let her die? Over pride. You know you can't get pregnant again. You both tried and failed." The words hit Grace like a blow to the chest. She didn't turn around. She didn't scream or cry. She just walked away, her shoulders heavy, her face soaked with silent tears, her heart torn between dignity and desperation. Grace spent the entire day running from place to place like a woman chased by time. She knocked on doors, friends, cousins, church members, even distant relatives. Some didn't open. Some made excuses. Others looked her in the eye and simply said, "I'm sorry. I can't help." Each rejection felt like a stab to the chest. She tried getting a loan, but the process was slow and full of requirements, documents, collateral, endless forms. They told her it could take days. Days. Emily didn't have days. By nightfall, Grace was exhausted. Her legs ached. Her eyes were red. Her spirit was breaking. She returned home in silence. But instead of sleeping, she pulled out every box, every drawer. She gathered all her jewelry, gold bracelets, rings, earrings, even her wedding ring. She placed her expensive dresses and handbags in a bag. The ones she wore during better times. The ones Frank gifted her when they were both smiling. She sold it all. No price was too low. She just needed cash. Now, by the time she returned to the hospital, it was almost midnight. Her face was soaked with sweat and tears. Her hands shook as she stepped into the waiting area. Aunt Miriam saw her and rushed forward. "Were you able to get it?" Miriam asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Grace shook her head slowly, her lips quivering. "Not all." Miriam's face dropped. Without wasting a second, Grace ran to the doctor's office and dropped to her knees. "Doctor, please," she cried. "This is all I could get. I sold everything. My clothes, my jewelry. Please, help me. I swear I'll pay the rest later. Just save my baby." The doctor looked at her with sad eyes. "Ma'am, I understand your pain, but the surgery is expensive. We can't begin unless the full payment is made. Equipment, specialists, everything is already being prepared, but we need the rest to continue." Grace fell to the floor, sobbing. "Please, please." The doctor gently helped her up. "This is not the time to cry, Grace. Your daughter is slipping. She doesn't have much time left. If something isn't done very soon, we might lose her." Grace's hands were shaking uncontrollably. She pulled out her phone and began calling everyone she knew again. Some didn't answer. Some read her messages and didn't respond. Some replied with a simple, cold, "Sorry, I don't have." She messaged pastors, friends from church, old neighbors, even strangers she barely knew. No one came through. Aunt Miriam brought the little money she had saved, but it was nothing compared to what was needed. "It's like throwing a drop of water into fire," Miriam said, her voice breaking. Still, Grace gathered all she could and returned to the doctor's office. "Please," she said again, "this is what I have now." But before the doctor could even reply, a nurse burst through the door. "Doctor, emergency. The little girl, she's crashing." The doctor grabbed her coat. "Let's go." They rushed down the hallway toward Emily's room. But when Grace and Aunt Miriam tried to follow, the nurses blocked the door. "I'm sorry, you can't go in. Please wait here." Grace stood frozen, staring at the door. Her ears could hear the monitors beeping faster, the sound of rushing footsteps, the voices yelling inside. She clutched her chest. "Please, God, don't take her." A few minutes later, the doctor stepped out. Her face said it all. "I'm so sorry, Grace," she said quietly. "Emily's heart is failing. She has only a few hours left, unless the surgery happens immediately. We've done all we can without it." Grace opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. No tears. Nothing. It was like her soul had run dry. She sank to the floor, her body weak, her arms hanging by her side. It was night now. The hallway was silent. Grace sat on the cold tiles with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand. Still messaging. Still begging. Some people sent small amounts. Most ignored her. A few responded with fake sympathy. And some didn't say a word at all. She looked at her daughter's door one more time and whispered, "I'm not giving up. Emily, hold on for Mommy." The sky was still dark when Grace stepped out again. The morning air was cold, but her heart felt colder. Her feet carried her back to the one place she had hoped never to return, Pastor Silas's house. She stood at the door for a moment, her hands clenched by her sides, her eyes empty. Silas opened the door and saw her. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. "I knew you'd come back," he said. "Come in." Grace didn't say a word. She just followed. He led her quietly to his room. She hesitated, but didn't turn back. A moment later, Silas stepped out of the room again, this time holding a leash. A large dog padded behind him. Grace's eyes widened. "What is the dog doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Silas chuckled darkly. "Yesterday, you refused to feed me. But today," he said, locking the door behind them, "I will eat, and my dog will eat too." Grace's heart dropped. She turned toward the door, but it was already shut. Time passed. The house was silent. Then, the door creaked open. Silas stepped out of the room, wiping sweat from his forehead. The dog followed him, tail wagging. He looked satisfied. A few minutes later, Grace stepped out. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red and glassy. She looked broken, like someone who had left a part of herself behind. Her clothes were wrinkled. Her steps were weak. Her breath was shaky. But in her hand was a small bag full of money. She didn't speak. She didn't look at Silas. She just walked. Slowly, quietly, like a ghost in the early morning mist. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Every part of her hurt. But in her heart, she kept one thought alive. "I have to save them. I have to save my husband and my child." No one else would know the price she had paid. No one else would understand the silence she now carried in her soul. But Grace knew. And even though her body felt weak, her spirit stood tall, for Emily, for Frank. She walked back toward the hospital, back to the place where love was slipping away, and only her sacrifice stood between life and death. Grace ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Her heart pounded. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. The bag of money was clutched tightly in her arms. She burst into the hospital doors, tears already streaming down her face. "Doctor," she cried, stumbling into the office. "Doctor, I have the money. I got it all." She reached into the bag and placed the bundle of cash on the doctor's desk. Her hands trembled. Her eyes begged for hope. The doctor looked at the money, then looked at her with eyes full of sorrow. "Grace," he said softly, we don't need the money anymore." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" she asked quickly, trying to push the money toward him. "Count it. Please, it's complete." The doctor stood slowly and shook his head. "We tried everything, but it was too late." Her body froze. "No," she whispered. Then louder. "No. What are you saying?" She turned and sprinted toward her daughter's room. She yanked the door open. The bed was empty. "Emily," she whispered. She backed out and rushed again to the doctor's office, her voice louder now, panicked. "Where is my daughter? Where is Emily?" The doctor's voice dropped. "She's gone, Grace. We lost her." Grace stood like a statue, her body shaking. "No, no, no, no. Aunt Miriam and a nurse are with her," he added gently. They took her to the morgue." A scream tore from Grace's throat. It echoed through the entire hospital. Doctors, nurses, patients, all stopped and turned toward the sound. "No, please, not my baby," she cried, falling to her knees. She grabbed the bag of money and threw it across the room, the cash scattering like leaves in a storm. "I did everything. I gave up everything," she screamed. "I went through pain no one should ever go through." She remembered the 7 long years of praying, crying, waiting for a child. How her arms ached every time she saw other mothers holding babies. She remembered that night at Pastor Silas's house. The shame, the pain, the betrayal, all for nothing. Her heart broke into pieces right there on the hospital floor. Days later, Frank opened his eyes for the first time in a week. Machines beeped softly beside him. He looked around the hospital room, confused, then saw Grace sitting quietly by the window. She rushed to him, holding his hand tightly. "You're awake. Thank God, you're awake," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Frank smiled weakly but noticed the sadness in her face. "Where's Emily?" he asked gently. Grace's lips quivered. Silence. Frank looked at her again. "Where's our daughter, Grace?" Grace broke down. She didn't make it." Frank's chest rose sharply. "No." His hands dropped weakly onto the bed as tears rolled down his cheeks. "She was just a baby," he whispered. He turned his face to the wall and cried silently. A few days later, Frank was discharged from the hospital, but he couldn't walk. He now used a wheelchair, and Grace cared for him at home. She cooked, cleaned, sat with him. But deep down, she carried a heavy guilt, a secret she couldn't hold for much longer. She avoided his eyes. Her heart twisted with every kind thing he said to her. One quiet afternoon, as she helped him sip water, Frank looked at her with curious eyes. "Grace, how did you get the money for Emily's surgery?" Grace froze. Her hands trembled slightly. Sweat began to form on her forehead. Why do you ask?" she stuttered. "Because the doctors said you were about to pay before she—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "It was thousands of dollars." She looked away, her throat dry. I got help," she said softly. "From who?" Frank pressed. She hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, "Pastor Silas." Frank raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Wow, that's generous. And you didn't tell me? I should go thank him." "No," Grace shouted, panic flashing in her eyes. Frank narrowed his eyes. "Why not?" Grace looked like she wanted to disappear. Tears began to well up again. "Grace," Frank said slowly, "is there something you're not telling me?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Then the dam broke. She dropped to the floor and covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't want to. I didn't plan to," she cried. Frank's heart began to pound. "Grace, talk to me." Through her tears, she finally told him everything. How she went back to Pastor Silas when no one else helped. How he locked her in his room. How he brought his dog. How she gave up her body, just to save their daughter. Frank sat in shock. His face turned pale. His hands clenched into fists. Tears filled his eyes and dropped like heavy rain down his cheeks. He tried to rise from his wheelchair, forgetting he couldn't stand. He grabbed the armrest tightly, his face red with anger. "I'll kill him," he said through clenched teeth. "I swear, Grace, I'll kill him." But his legs didn't move. Grace sat in the corner, sobbing silently, unable to look him in the eye. The room was filled with pain, with betrayal, with heartbreak. Frank's blood boiled like fire. But more than anything, his heart shattered all over again. Frank's eyes were filled with fury. He grabbed his phone with shaky hands and called Aunt Miriam. "Please, help me into the car," he said. "I need to see him. I need to see Silas now." Miriam didn't ask questions. She helped him out of the house, into the car, and drove straight to Pastor Silas's house. Frank's heart burned with pain and anger. As soon as they arrived, he rolled down the car window and began shouting, "Silas, come out here." The gate opened. Pastor Silas stepped out, followed by his wife, who looked confused and startled. Frank rolled his wheelchair closer, his face wet with tears. "How could you?" he cried. "How could you do this to my wife?" Silas blinked. "I trusted you like a father. I worshipped with you. I paid my tithe to this church. I helped in every way I could. And this is how you repay me? You're a monster. A heartless man." Gasps echoed from the neighbors who had gathered to watch the scene. Silas's wife covered her mouth in shock, her eyes wide as she realized what was being said. Frank's hands trembled on the armrests of his wheelchair. He tried to push himself closer, but Aunt Miriam held him back, afraid he might collapse. Then Silas chuckled. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "When you're done shouting," he said coldly, "take your crippled, infertile body out of my house." Then he turned and walked back inside, slamming the door behind him. The words hit Frank like a hammer to the chest. He sat there, frozen. Even Miriam's hands around his shoulders couldn't stop the sting. They drove back home in silence. But as they opened the door, they heard sobbing. Grace was on the floor, curled up, holding her stomach and gasping for breath. "Grace!" Miriam shouted, running to her. "What's wrong?" Frank's heart jumped in fear. He watched helplessly as Grace cried out in pain. They rushed her to the hospital. Minutes later, the doctor came out of the room with a strange expression. "Mr. Frank," he said gently, "your wife is a few weeks pregnant." The hallway fell silent. Both Frank and Aunt Miriam gasped. Frank turned his face slowly toward Grace, who was lying weakly on the hospital bed. His eyes filled with disbelief, then disappointment. "Shame on you, Grace," he whispered. "Shame on you." "Frank, please," Grace said, tears already forming. But Frank raised a hand to stop her. His face turned cold. "I don't want to see you in my house. Not anymore," he said. "If you're coming, it should be to pick your things." He turned his wheelchair and rolled away without another word. Outside, he got into a taxi and left, leaving Grace, broken. Her body collapsed into the hospital pillow. She cried like her heart was falling apart piece by piece. Aunt Miriam held her tightly. "Don't worry, Grace," she whispered. "I'll talk to him. I promise I will." Later that day, Miriam took Grace home. But when they arrived, the front door was wide open. All of Grace's belongings, her clothes, her bags, even her shoes, were piled outside the house. Frank sat in the living room, still in his wheelchair, staring blankly at the wall. Aunt Miriam held Grace's hand and pulled her inside. They both knelt down before Frank. "Frank, please," Miriam said gently. "Please forgive her. She was desperate. She thought she was going to lose you both. She did what she did because she was scared." Frank clenched the arms of his wheelchair. His jaw tightened. Grace broke into tears beside Miriam, her hands on the floor. "Please, Frank, please." Frank didn't move. His silence was louder than any scream. Then Miriam added softly, "Maybe, just maybe, this is God's way of replacing Emily. Maybe this child is part of a plan. God's plan." Frank snapped, his voice like thunder. "God's plan for my wife to carry another man's child? If that's God's plan, then I don't want it." Tears ran down Grace's face. "I didn't do it for myself. I did it for you. For Emily. I gave up my body to save both of you. Do you think it didn't hurt me? Do you think I enjoyed it?" She fell completely to the floor, sobbing. "I sacrificed my soul, and after all that, I still lost her." Frank's face twisted with pain. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman who stayed by his side in a hospital bed, who sold her belongings, who begged on her knees. And the tears finally came. Slowly, silently, they rolled down his face. He opened his arms. "Come here," he whispered. Grace crawled into his arms and hugged him tight. They cried together. Miriam stood beside them, wiping her eyes, smiling through her tears. At that moment, something heavy lifted. Frank took a deep breath and whispered, I'll take care of you and the baby, no matter what. And just like that, through all the pain, a small ray of healing began to shine. Months passed. Frank was no longer in a wheelchair. He could walk again, step by step, with strength and determination. Grace stood by him through it all. Her pregnancy was progressing, and together, they were slowly healing. But one quiet morning, everything changed. They were having breakfast when a sudden knock echoed at the door. Frank got up and opened it. Standing there was Pastor Silas. Frank's face hardened. His grip on the doorknob tightened. "What are you doing here?" Frank asked coldly. Silas didn't smile. His eyes were cold. "I came to collect my money," he said. "I didn't dash it to you. I loaned it to your wife. And I expect full payment." Frank's face turned red with anger. "You're crazy," he snapped, pushing the door to shut it. But Silas blocked it with his hand. "If you don't pay me back, I'll do something very stupid right now." Silas yelled, raising his fist to strike. Before anything could happen, his phone rang. He picked it up, breathing heavily. "Sir, your son," the voice on the line said. "He just collapsed. He's in critical condition." Silas's eyes widened in shock. He dropped his hand, turned to Frank, and said with a low voice, "This isn't over." Then he rushed back to his car and sped off to the hospital. At the hospital, Silas stormed inside, panic all over his face. "My son, where is he?" The doctor met him with a serious expression. "Sir, your son needs an urgent blood transfusion. It's critical." "I'll donate," Silas said without hesitation. They ran the tests. Minutes later, the doctor returned, confused. "Sir, your blood doesn't match." "What?" Silas asked in shock. "We checked your other 3 children too. None of them are a match." Silas blinked in disbelief. "That's impossible. They're my children." The doctor said nothing. Silas stood still, his mind spinning. A deep fear crept into his chest. Back at Frank's house, Grace sat on the couch, rubbing her swollen belly. She looked at her husband with concern. "Frank, I think we should just return the money. Please. I know what he did was evil, but let's not give him a reason to cause more problems." Frank sighed. He hated the thought of giving Silas anything, but Grace's words softened him. After hours of pleading, he finally agreed. 2 days later, Frank drove to Pastor Silas's house with a briefcase full of cash. But as he approached, he saw a large crowd outside the gate. Ambulance sirens were blaring. People were crying. Some were whispering in shock. Frank stepped out of his car, heart pounding. "What's going on?" he asked a woman standing nearby. The woman's face was pale. She shook her head slowly. "Pastor Silas is dead," she said. "He ended everything this morning." Frank's eyes widened. "What? How? What?" The woman swallowed hard. "He went for a DNA test. Found out that none of the 4 children were his. Each one had a different father. The shock, it was too much. He couldn't take it." Frank stood frozen, the briefcase still in his hand. He didn't say a word. Slowly, he turned around, placed the briefcase back into his car, and drove away. When he got home, Grace was standing in the living room with Aunt Miriam. She looked bright and full of energy. Before Frank could speak, Grace jumped into his arms, hugging him tightly. Frank was surprised. "Why are you so happy, sweetheart?" Grace pulled back, eyes sparkling with joy. "One of our church members told me that Pastor Silas couldn't have children, that he's not even capable of being a father biologically." Frank's eyes widened. "That's not all," Grace continued, glowing. "Yesterday, I secretly went with Aunt Miriam for a DNA test." She took a breath and smiled. "The results came out today. Silas is not the father of my unborn baby." Frank's mouth dropped open. "Then whose is it?" Grace smiled wider, eyes filled with tears, but this time, tears of joy. "It's yours, Frank. You're the father." Frank froze. He stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to believe it. Then Grace added, "And guess what? The scan said I'm carrying twins." Frank dropped to his knees, overcome with emotion. He began laughing and crying at the same time. He hugged Grace's belly tightly, pressing his cheek against it. "Thank you, God. Thank you," he whispered. Tears ran down his face, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy, of healing, of a new beginning. Miriam stood in the corner, wiping her eyes, smiling as she watched the family that had been broken finally become whole again.